Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Is It Fascist? And today we're going to be taking a look at the Democratic Party of the United States and trying to answer the question once and for all, is it a fascist party? Because this is one of the most common accusations you see in the United States from both the left and the right that they tend to throw at one another. Liberals will say conservatives are fascist. Conservatives will write books like Liberal Fascism. They'll say Obama was Hitler reborn, that Biden is the conductor of America, that the Democratic Party just copy pasted the National Fascist Party's manifesto, that Kamala is the commander in chief of the Legion of St. Michael the Archangel, and that AOC is a dyed in the wool phalangist. And the point of this series is to take these accusations and try to look a bit deeper and see, does the entity in question actually bear any resemblance to what fascism really is, or is it just an insult, a polemic, something that's thrown at somebody else to try to make them look bad? And we took a peek at this previously with MAGA twice, and we determined then that MAGA is not fascist. So we're going to give the Democrats the same treatment and go through the various criteria and try to give them a fair evaluation. As always, I have my own thinking as to where this will probably end up, but as much as possible, I try to be fair and objective and not base it on what my personal inclinations might be one way or another. And I'm not going to go into a bunch of background because I think most of us either know it or there's something I'll cover it later. I will say at the outset, though, the Democratic Party that we're taking a look at is the post-Obama one, the one that existed during Trump's first presidency, first term in office, the Biden presidency, and the one that exists at the moment. I think it's important whenever I'm doing one of these to specify a particular era for a group, because a lot of things like ideology, tendency, modus operandi, all those things can really change over a prolonged period of time. And honestly, I think the score for this would be quite a bit different, or at least somewhat different if we were taking a look at Obama rather than the current incarnation we find it in. So that being said, let's take a look at it and try to determine, is the Democratic Party fascist? So our first criteria is an ideologically syncretic mixture of reactionary or conservative ideas and revolutionary progressive ideas. So I think this one's pretty obvious. Absolutely not. There is nothing conservative or reactionary about the modern Democratic Party. You don't even have the last remaining vestiges of American nationalism that you had during the Obama era or the Clinton era, where they would at least try to tip their hat towards stuff like family values and things like that. I find there isn't even really a pretense of that anymore. Maybe you get a little bit out of that with Biden. Maybe that's the reason they tried to like run Biden to make more kind of old stock old Democrats feel a bit better about voting that way. But I really don't think this is an arguable point. The Democrats, I don't really see on any metric that they could be vaguely called reactionary or conservative. They're entirely a revolutionary progressive movement at this point in time. I mean, I don't think I really need to go into any more detail. I'm not trying to cop out here. I can't think of a single issue that you could argue that they are reactionary or conservative on. So we're just going to give them a 0 here and move on to the next one. So this is an interesting one, and I was wondering how I was going to be able to address it. So identitarianism with a clearly defined in-group and out-group. This can be cultural, religious, ethnic, or racial. So the modern Democratic Party definitely embraces identitarianism. It is a core aspect of who they are. Critical race theory, gender, disparate impact, all kinds of stuff. The problem is there is not a clearly defined in group. There is an out group, sort of. Specifically, in a broad sense, it's white heterosexual Christian males, and but even then, it's not really absolute. It's they allow like Tim Walz or some other guys to come or Biden to come in, and they can still be the leaders and they can still be cool, and their identity doesn't necessarily automatically preclude them from taking part. Sometimes certain groups are allowed in, like sometimes Muslims are okay, sometimes they're not. Sometimes um sometimes we have to push the trans issue, sometimes we have to back away from it a little bit. Well, I do think they use identity politics. Realistically, I don't really think they can be considered to be identitarian. So I'm going to give them a 0 here. I'm sure a lot of people would disagree, but I don't really see any kind of clear definition. It's just more or less something that's used in kind of a cynical, or maybe not cynical way, but it's used as a way to try to gain power. But I think within the coalition, there is many different types of identitarianism, but there's not an overall one. There's like black identitarians, there's Muslims, there's gays, there's all this stuff. But I think the party as a whole does not have a clear cut identity in the way that this would suggest. Like in the way that the National Socialist Party perceived the German people, or the way the Ba'ath Party perceives the Arab people. I just don't think it's clear enough to get a point here. Okay, number 3. A revanchist or romantic nationalist desire to restore the nation to its former glory or avenge itself against a historical foe. I think, once again, this one is a pretty obvious no. I don't think any group that is internationalist can really be fascist by definition. You might be able to make some kind of case that if it's like a pan nationalist, like if it's Hitler trying to unite all the Germans and they happen to be in different countries, that's not really internationalism though. Maybe you can make some sort of case if there's some sort of like Christian internationalist fascism, but I really just don't see it. The Democratic Party is very internationalist. It hates the concept of the nation state. It hates the concept of borders, of national culture, of a national language. There's really not a revanchist aspect to it, to be honest. Like they don't want to. They hate. Well, I mean, they hate "Make America Great Again." Like "Make America Great Again" is literally a call to restore the nation to former glory, and they absolutely and totally despise that. So I really don't see anything not even like left wing nationalistic or revanchist about them. I guess you could say they're revanchist because they hate Trump and they hate conservatives and they want them to suffer, but it's not in the terms that we're seeing here. So I'm gonna have to give this another 0. Number 4, a belief in the supremacy of the party or state. Now this is an interesting one. Um, I would. It's hard because I'm gonna have to go with. I'm gonna have to give this one a point. So I think the Democratic Party, particularly post Obama, has become increasingly, I don't know, stratified, professionalized, bureaucratized, something like that. It seems to me that with the lacking of any kind of clear leader or charismatic figure to kind of hold the party together, increasingly kind of the machinery, the DNC, the bureaucracy, the various think tanks and NGOs and stuff that make up the Democratic Party have kind of taken over. America itself, more or less, is proceeding on autopilot at the moment, with the various institutions around the Democratic Party just kind of going forward with whatever their pre-programmed plan was. I do think if you were to ask the question, is there an understanding that like the party is always right, the party is great, we must act in the service of the party as an institution and not just liberalism as an ideology or America as a country or something like that. I think that is very prevalent with the Democratic Party. I think that's always been one of its major strengths over the Republican Party, is that the organizational entity has a very strong identity and has a very strong structure within it. And loyalty to the institution of the Democratic Party and the machine that supports it is really more important than any particular ideological inclination one person might have one way or another. Even so, though, it's not particularly ideological commitment to the party in the same way that you see in other in communism or other forms of fascism. The party is more of a bureaucratic institution and an electoral vehicle rather than a revolutionary vanguard. Number 4, a conception of an idealized new man. This is an interesting one. I'm going to have to give it a point, although once again, this is in a very different way than what I think Mussolini or Hitler would have intended. This harkens back to the whole idea that there's the new fascist man. The new fascist man is going to be a man of action. He's going to be masculine. He's going to be willing to sacrifice for his family. He's going to provide, for his nation. He's going to provide for his family. That he's just this tough, masculine man of action who's willing to do what needs to be done. And you had the new communist man, which is somewhat similar. He's a worker. He's willing to sacrifice his personal ambition and his personal wealth for the good of the whole, for the good of the state, for the good of the collective. And there's some sort of idea that you can fundamentally change people into something else, or that there is this ideal that maybe is not exactly the same as the current societal norm that people should be turned towards. So I do think there very much is that. Now the definition of what that is very vague. Um as it can vary from everybody needs to be, I don't know, transsexual or have some sort of non cisgendered sexual orientation, or that they need to be multiracial and bred together. There's definitely a conception of a new man, of like a new person. It's just very vague. It's an ever moving target and it's very amorphous. I do think, though, if you were to maybe to go into more detail, it would be someone who is effeminate, who doesn't take strong action, who doesn't act in their own self interest, who's kind of a cosmopolitan, who doesn't have any particularly strong ties to the country of his birth, who embraces diversity, embraces a global world. I think if you were to probably go and read through the end of history, that would probably give you a good idea about it. But I do think this exists. I just don't think it's very easy to describe. Okay, number six, the foreign policy that places national self interest above ideology, international law, or traditional morality. This is going to get a zero. Sorry, not the Obama. The Biden administration has had arguably the most ideological foreign policy in American history. Even Reagan, for all like people call him a neocon, they talk about all his spreading democracy and stuff like that. Reagan was willing to talk to Gorbachev to do business with him. He was willing to talk to the Chinese. He was willing to talk to the East Germans. For all his bluster, all his anti-communism, and all his posturing, Reagan ultimately would actually speak to his enemies, and he did business with them, and he got a lot of stuff done. He got nuclear arms limitation. He got Germany reunited. He got the Cold War resolved, at least on one end. But even and I present him because he's often presented as the most ideological prior to Bush president. Even under Bush, they would still talk to the Russians. At least they would still meet from time to time and have negotiations. But under the Biden administration, they don't even talk to Russia anymore. They don't talk to their enemies. They've tried to overthrow governments that are friendly to them because they're insufficiently friendly to them. They basically the precondition to do diplomacy with the United States in the Biden era is you just have to basically completely and totally prostrate yourself, surrender, give them all their demands, and they might be willing to pencil you in for a half hour meeting after lunch. But no, I think that it is extremely ideological. We have this fake rules based international order. It's incredibly moralistic in the way that they look at the world. Now, is it extremely hypocritical? Yes, but there isn't a concept of national self interest at all. If anything, that's viewed as something that's evil, and it's about America spreading diversity and inclusion throughout the world. So I'm gonna have to give it a big zero for that one. Number seven, an indifference to or marginalization of economics. This is an interesting one. I feel like the left cares a lot less about economics post the Great Recession than they did previously. Now, there's a number of reasons for this. I think it's they've switched more to various forms of identitarianism. as one of the bases of their coalition. Like I said, black, gay, uh, Jewish, Muslim, whatever you want to go with. And you just don't hear as much of like the idea of nationalizing companies, of creating new government monopolies, of new social programs. The last one I can really think of, at least in America, would be the You Can Afford Healthcare Act. And that was this bizarre chimera that mixed a whole bunch of different things together. I guess there's like the Green New Deal and there's stuff like that. I just don't feel like the modern left and the modern Democratic Party is nearly as interested in economics as they used to be. They're a lot more interested in diversity and inclusion stuff and spreading that than any idea of spreading free trade or other stuff like that. That being said, at least when it comes to the environmental stuff, I think that there is enough there to give it half a point, but I just don't think it's really their focus anymore. I think also part of that is when all the corporations just decided to side with them after the 2008 financial crisis and they just became permanently aligned together, it became kind of awkward to keep calling for corporations to be destroyed or taxed or broken up when they were the entire support basis that the modern Democratic Party is based on. Number eight, a masculine approach to problem solving focusing on decisive action. No. 100% no. Look at Biden's term in office and let me tell me whether or not that is a masculine, decisive response to problem solving. Look at him, look at Blinken, look at Kamala, look at Milley. They're just the most like, even just the males are just so effeminate. They're so weak. They aren't willing to stand up for themselves. If you look at Biden talking about Netanyahu, he's like, oh, Netanyahu was mean to me. I can't do anything to control him. It's so sad. And they're just extreme. They're all just extremely weak. And whenever they do act, it's through like five different proxies. And it's getting someone else to do the dirty work for them. And it's never being upfront with what they want. The whole Ukraine war is like just an exercise in this feminine like implausible deniability, trying to diffuse responsibility, trying to pretend that you aren't the one involved, that you're not the one behind it, and stuff like that. The complete and total flaccid response to the whole crisis in the Middle East, once again, is one of the most effeminate, weak ways of dealing with it. Now, you can say a lot of things about Trump, and I have in the past. But one thing he is not is effeminate and unwilling to make decisions. Biden is incapable of making decisions. This is something that the Chinese have complained about. This is something that Putin's complained about. This is one of the reasons that a lot of world leaders hate Biden because he is a fundamentally weak man. And you can't trust a weak man. So we're going to give them a 0 here. Okay, encouragement of mass political action, often in the form of a political party or other organization. Now, this is an interesting one. So, this is kind of a reference to ongoing political campaigns. This was particularly prevalent in Maoist China, where everyone was constantly supposed to be involved with a particular political movement of the day, or political theory, or political um, program, and the idea was all of society would collectively pursue it. And obviously the biggest example of this was the Four Pests campaign, wherein the Chinese were able to exterminate most of the sparrow population, which led to the Great Famine. But that's another story. Um, Stuff like collecting during World War II, collecting scrap metal or growing victory gardens or buying bonds or spying on your neighbors and reporting them if they're disloyal or you think they're spies or stuff like that. Basically, it's the idea that people need to incorporate politics into their daily life and they need to constantly be pushing an ideological and political message, and this just needs to be incorporated into absolutely everything. And I do think the modern Democratic Party certainly does embody this in a lot of ways. To a certain extent, you can almost argue that a lot of forms of political correctness are this, because particularly post Obama, you've moved away from any kind of concept of equality or treating people the way that you would want to be treated or stuff like that. And now it's just accepting whatever the other person says. It's just giving them immediately what they want. And they've become increasingly aggressive with lawfare, with doxing, with destroying people's lives. We've moved away from not being racist to being anti racist, to telling people to tattle on their coworkers or tattle on people that they know, and that you have to actively be involved in your daily life with trying to root out racism and root out enemies of the state and enemies of the guiding ideology. In Canada, we also have this reinforced with things like land acknowledgements, with Orange Shirt Day, which is the need to politicize absolutely everything. BLM was also a very good example of this. Stuff like the Chaz, the Summer of Peace, stuff like that. I would say this is definitely part of it. It's just not as formally organized as some totalitarian movements of the past. Number 10, vanguardism, or the belief of an elite inner group to safeguard the new order slash revolution. Yes, I think if there's one aspect of the modern Democratic Party that resembles a fascist or communist party, it is probably how intense the vanguardism is. Now, you have the DNC, the party elite themselves, that basically have absolute control over the party. They're able to just change primaries on a dime. They're able to basically just predict who's going to be the candidate of something different. They're able to do all that stuff. And the actual party members and supporters and general population have very little influence on how things operate. But I mean, the vanguardism goes beyond that. They have all the people in the media, all the people in the universities and the bureaucracy. They have attempted to just stack their people into every aspect of society, all of whom are ideologically and um, personally committed to ensuring the continuation of the revolution, of ensuring the continuation of their policies. So I would say that this is very much the case. You could argue that almost all of modern leftism is basically has just taken vanguardism to its logical extreme. It's just not so much the party anymore. Although there is a party, it's incorporating it into all kinds of other aspects of society. Once again, into the universities, into the media, into the various corporations and bureaucracies and stuff like that. So I would say this is the case. I think this is especially the case post Obama because there is no charismatic real leader to the party. It's just kind of this amorphous mass of the party bureaucracy. 11, an often charismatic leader who wields absolute or near absolute power over the state or movement. That is a 0. There is no one in the party like that. Given that you have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who are two of the least charismatic people I've ever seen, um, there really isn't anybody. Now, if this was the Obama era, this would definitely get a point. Maybe during the Clinton era, even this would get half a point. But no, you don't have anything like that. And I think this is a core aspect of fascism, and it's why it's on the list. You can't have a fascist movement without a charismatic leader, but it's kind of like bread and butter. They just go together. I mean, you can put jam on the bread, or you can put margarine on the bread, or something like that, but it's not quite butter. So I I don't think that they have this at all. They have like the most boring, unlikable, uninteresting people running their party. So this gets a big 0. Number 12, sublimation of the individual and individual rights into the interests of the group party, group state or party. I would say yes. There is a definite opposition to any kind of individual rights, be they property rights, be they freedom of speech, be they freedom of person, right to due process, right to work for a living, all kinds of stuff like that. It's particularly prevalent with how arbitrary a lot of hate speech laws are. Now, in the United States, this is not nearly as prevalent, but there's kind of de facto hate speech laws. So, can the government technically arrest you for saying something mean? Well, they do in a lot of cases, but theoretically, they can't. However, you can get doxxed and and you can get fired from your job and you can't get blacklisted, so you'll never be hired again. So that's kind of to me a de facto hate speech law, and that's very easily done. If you look at any of the protests or riots they have, like they don't respect private property, even if it's minority owned. They just smash it and they steal it and stuff like that. Um, I don't think there really is any kind of respect for it. Although once again, it's not especially statist compared to um, traditional fascist movements. There's not really this belief. At least I don't see there. There is a desire for bigger government and government power, but there's not a worship of the state or a belief in the supremacy of the American state within the Democratic Party that you see in a lot of other institutions. Or rather, a lot of actual fascist parties. So let us go back and let us tally how many points we have. So the Democratic Party has one, two, three, four, five and a half. So the Democratic Party got 5.5 points out of 12. That means it is neither fascist nor para-fascist. It actually got less than half of the points. I think it's honestly about the same as what MAGA got. And the only reason MAGA was as high as it was is because of Donald Trump's unique charisma. But yeah, no, the Democrats aren't a fascist party. The idea they're a fascist party is absurd. Other than maybe having some totalitarian aspects of their ideology and not being as interested in economics as the old left was, I really don't see anything like vaguely fascist about them. There's no romantic nationalism. There's no attempts to combine old and new ideas. There's no charismatic figure leading them. Um, there's no nationalism or concept of national interest. I mean, you can be lacking some of these, but if you don't have any reactionary conservative elements, you don't have any form of, you aren't nationalistic, you aren't focused on any kind of idea of national self interest, if you're just completely ideological when it comes to foreign policy, there's no clear identity, any of this stuff, it's not fascist at all. There might be a couple things that they've done that a fascist party might do, but kind of part of the point of this is that there's always overlap between institutions or different ideologies. Like if I was going to take an authoritarian conservative like Franco or something like that, then yeah, a lot of the things here would apply to Franco. There's a lot of overlap between authoritarian conservatism and fascism. A lot of the things here would also apply to a communist party. If I was to take the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, a lot of these things would apply to it. That's because there is a lot of overlap between different ideologies, particularly when you're looking at authoritarian or totalitarian ideologies. When you start to get into, I guess, kind of other ones, it just doesn't fit as well. Like, conservatism, at least in the American sense, is very influenced by classical liberalism and libertarianism, which is basically the exact opposite of fascism. And what the Democrats propose is probably more in line with something like Maoism or internationalism or something like that. There's not a nationalistic part to it, and therefore it just cannot be fascist. Now, you can have certain types of pan nationalist fascism. Like, I would argue that Bothism is probably fascism, and that is a pan nationalist idea that wants to unite all the Arab peoples, but that is a clearly defined group, and that is based on the desire to have an Arab nation state. Whereas I don't even really know, like, do they want a one world government? Like, I don't even really know where the modern left is like with that. They don't really seem to care as much about the structures of power as they used to. It seems very much an afterthought compared to spreading their ideology. So I'm going to go ahead and say that the Democratic Party is not fascist. It's kind of a ridiculous idea to say that it is. It's not even like within striking distance of saying it's like harshly fascist or arguably fascist. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it interesting. God bless, and talk to you all again real soon.